Hello, and welcome to the Gnostic Warrior radio show and podcast, broadcasting from GnosticWarrior.com in San Diego, California, to around the world. I'm your host, Mo, and today on the show, we have author and the founder of the Asatru Folk Assembly, Stephen McNallen. Stephen was one of the earliest advocates reconstructing Germanic paganism in modern times. His work has spanned over the last 4 decades. The word Asatru comes to us from the Old Norse, the tongue of ancient Scandinavia, where it means those loyal to the gods. Asatru is an expression of the native pre-Christian spirituality of Europe. More specifically, it is the way by which the Germanic people have always and traditionally related to the divine and to the world around them. In this awesome podcast, Stephen goes over the ways of the ancestors and how you too can connect with your own ancestors of the past. This is not about just his race, but about honoring our ancestors, whatever race you may be out there. And we all need to respect one another along our paths, and in doing so, we respect our ancestors who, for without them, we wouldn't be here, because our ancestors are us and we are them. This is a great podcast, and it's a real honor to interview Stephen McNallen. Thanks for being on the show today, Stephen. How you doing?
I'm doing really fine, Mo. Thank you. It's a beautiful day out here on the West Coast.
Yeah, and is here in Southern California as well. Before we get into the great work you're doing now, can you please tell the audience a little bit about who you are and your background?
Yes, I am a person who is largely responsible for reviving the native European belief called Asatru in the modern world. Asatru comes from an Icelandic term meaning approximately those true to the gods. We see our relationship with the holy powers, whether you choose to call those gods or whatever. Sometimes that word is a bit of a stumbling block. We see that as an intimate relationship of loyalty, of friendship, and kinship. This is the ancient belief of the Germanic peoples, best known in its form that the Vikings practiced it perhaps, but not simply limited to them. And I believe that just as it gave our ancestors comfort thousands of years ago, so it can give us, too, comfort and guidance.
And your organization, Asatru, it primarily deals with the Nordic and Germanic traditions of your ancestors?
Pretty much the latter.
Okay.
We deal with the Germanic worldview, but we understand really the kinship, especially of all European descended peoples. I believe that the geneticist Brian Sykes remarked that, something like 85% of the European genome is still descended from those early hunter-gatherers who first moved into the area. So our focus is Nordic, but we consider especially all people of European heritage to be kin on one level or another.
A lot of people get confused out there when you start talking about the Norse, the Danes, the Scandinavians, the Angles, the Saxons. Can you briefly explain the differences between these tribes, and are they all of different races?
Well, you're speaking now about Nordics/Germanics, or?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. The Nordics, I think, are merely an extension of the Germanics. When we think of Nordics, we think typically of Scandinavians. We think, Swedes and Danes and Icelanders and Norwegians. But there were Germanic tribes running all over Europe. Central Europe was full of Germanic tribes, sharing a lot of that territory with the people we call the Celts, to the extent that we can't always divide what tribes were Celtic and what tribes were Germanic. I mean, it was pretty much, these are very close kin. So Nordic implies something a little farther north, but the Germanic peoples were all about the area. And in fact, of course, they wandered far beyond the bounds of Europe itself.
And this would be in regards to the Germanic tribes, the Angles and the Saxons?
Yes, exactly. In fact, the Angles and the Saxons seem to have migrated over from the lower part of Denmark to England and settled there. So again, it's a very close kinship.
Yeah, and of course, later on, they would merge. At one time, they were separate. You had the Angles, the Saxons, and then they would later become the Anglo-Saxons, a dual race and a combination of the tribes.
Well, and in fact, we've undergone kind of that recombination here in the so-called New World, too, haven't we? I mean, I'm a bit Irish. I'm a lot of Anglo-Saxon from my English ancestors. I've got ancestors from continental Germany. It's sort of a reblending or a recombination of closely allied tribes.
Yeah.
Some people say, oh, well, I'm a mutt. You know, I've got Norwegian and English and Scottish. Well, first of all, our ancestors weren't dogs, and it denigrates them to call ourselves mutts. And secondly, all of those peoples are so closely related that it's just, it makes no point at all to quibble amongst them.
Yeah, I agree. And just to give a term to the latter group, that would actually, they would be called in literature the Norman Anglo-Saxons, correct?
Well, the Normans were Vikings that settled in, of course, Normandy in northern France. So they are largely Scandinavian, and then they came over to England, and of course, over time intermarried with the people there, and also into Ireland, as the Irish are acutely aware. And so it's again a sort of a recombining of our ancestral elements.
What do you feel, Stephen, is the reason that, you know, we, in the past, we used to honor our ancestors, we'd all have our rights and our tribes, and over time, over the last 2,000 years, of course, with the advent of religion, Catholicism, the Judaic religions, basically the powers that be wanted to wash away these ancient teachings and make us forget. What do you feel would be the main reason for this to occur? Was it for us to unite as a people and stop having separate tribes and have one tribe, or was it something else, do you feel?
Well, I think it was several things, Mo. Well, I'll preface this by saying I have no personal gripes against people of the Christian faith. My mother and father were Christian. I was a Christian for many years until I changed my path. My recent ancestors, whom I revere and honor, were Christians. But that said, Europeans have been Christian for only 1 to 2% of our existence as a people. So Christianity is really a very new phenomenon in Europe. I believe that the reason that the Christian establishment, and it was both a religious and a political establishment, wanted to get rid of the old ancestor cults is because it was a competing factor. I mean, if your loyalty is to your ancestors, it's not likely to be to the priest or to the bishop or to the pope. So it was a divisive thing as far as they're concerned. And also by eradicating the lines between the tribes and just bringing everyone into the, quote, communion of saints, as Catholic liturgy says, they have easier control. It is a matter of basically getting allegiance, keeping that allegiance, and exercising control over the people.
Do you believe that those powers, you know, the religious elite, are still in control, even though they're not as much in the forefront as far as the Pope and the Vatican, that they're still secretly pulling the strings of royalty across the world?
You know, I really don't have an opinion on that.
Okay.
I think that certainly their obvious power has waned because the church itself has over time become degenerate and not carrying out its original mission. I think it's become modernized, liberalized, diluted in many respects. We do live in a rather degenerate age, and I think that they have suffered from that effect as much as we have.
Why do you feel it's important that we follow the ways of our ancestors?
To me, the way of the ancestors, our particular ancestors, is the one that is unique. We are a product of those people. We are, as in fact your own writing says, you know, we are our ancestors. I've been saying literally that for years, and I'm quite aware of all sorts of metaphysical wriggle room in there, but nevertheless, we have that connection. We are the latest expression of our ancestors in this little slice of space and time. And we owe them the gift of life. They passed to us that torch from generation to generation, despite famine and wars and everything else. They gave us the gift of life. Our bond with our ancestors, for me, is one that transcends space, transcends time, transcends mortality.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Stephen. I'm big in also connecting with my ancestors as well. And over the course of the last 4 years, I've done various DNA tests, and that actually helped me connect with them because I wasn't sure who I was. I was an American, and then before that, my family were Canadian. And then when I researched Canada, I realized, hey, they were formed by France at one time, and it was called New France. And then, I realized in studying France that France was, inhabited by the Gauls and the Celts. And so I got confused. So I eventually got a DNA test, and I feel that has helped me connect with my ancestors as well. Do you recommend people get a DNA test so they find out who their ancestors are if they don't know who they might be?
Yes, I do. To be honest, I haven't done it myself. I've just been so busy. Now that I'm officially retired from my wage earning job, I find that I'm busier than ever, strangely enough. I do think it's a good idea. Absolutely. I think I've got a pretty good handle on mine just because we've traced the family tree, but I haven't broken down percentages and stuff like that. I'm very willing to do that, though.
To be honest with you also, Stephen, I started my research with my family tree and my last name, and there's a lot that can be revealed there and tie you to your ancestry. And if you break down the names and you follow your family through the course of their migrations, you could also find out a lot about your history and connect with your tribe. But I found when I got the DNA test, it definitely put me leaps and bounds ahead in connecting with them. And do you feel that in doing this and connecting with our ancestors, that one of these things that we do to connect with them would be studying the same types of philosophies, the same types of ancient wisdom?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because I think that our metaphysical inclinations, our spiritual instincts, will more closely resemble that of our ancestors than it will, people from the other side of the planet, for example. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Buddhism. I've known many Buddhists, particularly Tibetan Buddhists, with whom I've worked to some extent, to considerable extent, actually. And I respect them, but it's not my way. It doesn't work for me. Now, I understand that Buddhism is very diverse, but what I've seen of it, it's not me. What is me, deep down inside, below that little layer of Christianity, is the millennia in which we followed another, older, and for us, better path.
In this mythology of the ancients, and you have the Norse and the various gods and goddesses, do you believe that these goddesses and these gods are real?
I believe they are real, but I can't tell you really a lot more about them than that. We have the mythology, which I feel are symbolic stories. They're essentially metaphor. I believe that myth, like poetry, says that which cannot be said. I believe that myth is that which never happened, but is always true. But that said, the nature of the gods and the goddesses is something that's intrigued me for obviously decades, because I've been doing this now for 45 years. So, I've had a lot of time to ponder this. And because my inclination is largely scientific, since I was going to be a theoretical physicist until I flunked Algebra 2 in high school. Since my leaning is largely scientific and rational, I kept looking for a rational explanation for the gods, or as I often call them, the holy powers, because God or gods becomes kind of a hang-up for some people as a term. They think immediately of the Abrahamic God, which I feel is unfortunate. But the nature of the gods, I sought this out, and I tried to find rationalist ways of explaining it. Well, they're beings from another space-time continuum, or another dimension, or this and that and the other. And Mo, I don't mean this to be a cop-out, but I've decided that some things are mystery with a capital M. Now, mystery with a little m is no big deal. I mean, that they make novels about that. But mystery with a big M is a whole different issue. And I don't think that it can necessarily be approached surely by rational means. For example, we've got the concept of the runes, which, if you're interested, we can talk about later. But I feel the gods are very similar to that. People read a book on runes and they say, oh, well, the rune Ingwaz means blah, 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 blah. But the rune doesn't mean those things. Those are things that are associated with it. They are keywords or whatever that go with the concept. Supposing, for example, that we have something in the middle of our room. Say it's a piece of artwork, a statue or something that is unknown to us, and we can look at it from this angle over here, and we can say, well, I know this and that about that. In the case of the runes, let's just pretending that that statue was the runes or the gods or some other mystery with a capital M. I can say, well, I know the linguistic derivation of its name. That helps a little. And I can walk a little bit farther around that circle around this thing in the center of the room. And I can say, well, I know that we have these references in the mythology, and that tells me a little more. And I can walk a little farther and say, well, we have poetic material about them, and that tells me a little something else. But none of these things tells me what the rune, what the statue, or what the god is. It merely tells me about it. To me, it's like those curves that kind of help mess me up in Algebra 2. You've got a graph that comes ever and ever closer to one of the axes, and towards the asymptote, and it never gets there, but it approaches infinitely close. I feel that the holy powers are mysteries in that sense. I think that eventually we can perhaps reach a higher level to where that mystery makes sense. But at this point, I'm not really obsessing about that anymore. In fact, I relish mystery. I love mystery because it is mystery that pulls us on.
Yeah, and it's that curiosity of it as well that keeps us going. You claim on your website, as a group in your world, you do not fear the holy powers or consider yourselves slaves to them. On the contrary, you share a community of fellowship with the divine. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. I think this is in sharp contrast with the Abrahamic view, for example, where people are basically seen as slaves of God. I believe was it Paul, the apostle, who described himself as a slave of God. And there's stuff in the Bible about how we are nothing more than dust under the chariot wheels of the Lord, and things of that sort. I believe that we are connected with our holy powers in several different ways. The mythology that we have describes how one of the gods came amongst the people and basically established the social classes. I'm sure that's some sort of a typical theme for mythologies in cultures everywhere. But he did this by sleeping with the wife of the household, as it says in the poems. He slept between the wife and the husband, and then 9 months later was born this baby who sort of epitomized all of the features of that particular social class. Now, you can take that literally or not so literally, but the point is we are descendant of the gods. We are blood kin to the gods. We have within us the same divine spark as the gods. And so we are not alien from each other. Quite the contrary. The gods don't want us just to honor them or to obey them or kiss their feet or whatever. They want us to become more like them because we have that potential within us.
How do people connect with that potential that they have within us? Do they need to basically shed all the preconceived notions and all the propaganda they've been fed since they've been children and start studying these teachings of their ancestors, and that's how they're more able to connect? I found when I started doing that, it was as if a new world was open to me. Before, I felt I had blinders on and, basically was spoon-fed my knowledge. But when I realized who my ancestors were and started walking the ways of my ancestors, I feel that my own evolution started to take off, where before this, I wasn't evolving. And it was like as if I was reborn again, reincarnated and re-illuminated, just awakened to this new reality. And I was excited about life again, and I am every day. And of course, talking to you and following the ways of my ancestors.
Yes, I think that's a prerequisite for any sort of spiritual evolution. I mean, if you come before the teacher with a full cup, you've got to empty that cup before the teacher can give you something else to put in the cup. It's an old comparison.
Oh, I love that analogy. That's great.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely true. We do have to kick out the old preconceived notions. We've got to understand that, in fact, we are friends and kin with the divine, and we must relate to them in that way. We must understand our own huge potential. And particularly in the Germanic/Nordic world, There's a number of avenues of approach that we use, and these are based on the mythology and in particular on the ordeals that the god Odin, commonly known as the father of the gods, underwent in order to attain a higher level.
And do you believe in reincarnation and rebirth, and that we reincarnate in the same family or the same tribes?
The short answer is yes. I've noted that many tribal groups around the world have that belief anyway, and I think that often tribal cultures are closer to the truth on these matters than philosophical religions that are constructed artificially, as sort of an engineered kind of philosophy. I think that their shamanic insights and their insights being immersed constantly in nature give them some good ideas on these things. Basically, I believe that we are reborn into our family line. I think that is a natural tendency. It probably is not an ironclad rule. I think there's other things that happen there, and it gets a little complex depending on people's situation. But I think that there is evidence of that. Now, you can always just rationalize that and say, oh, well, people notice that, because there are hereditary traits that this is so-and-so back. But I don't think it's that simple. I think there is a deeper truth there. Now, in the Germanic world, there's the idea that what we think of as the soul is actually a composite structure, that there's different aspects. And so one can always ask, well, are these particular qualities and soul components the ones that are reborn or not? And, one can go chase that idea around forever and ever. But like I said, the short answer was yes.
Yeah, and I feel where it can be complex, we do know today via DNA and, of course, through history that several of the tribes and races have mixed over time. So I'm under the belief, based on my studies of genetics, DNA, and, of course, history, that a lot of us are multiple tribes in one being. So, and I feel sometimes that this can also confuse us when we're reborn and reincarnated into this world. If we come possibly from two distinct separate races and tribes, which I believe that I'm made of, based on my DNA tests, that we're a little bit confused to what I would say this internal gnosis until we are awoken to it as well. But these other beings that I feel that have the different races and different tribes in them, they can also connect with both of the tribes. And, I have this theory that the powers that be were trying to mix us even though we don't know it. And that's kind of what we're seeing here in the West and, of course, the United States of America with the, pretty much open borders, and where tribal identity, race identity is actually frowned upon. And it seems like that is also happening in Europe and, all across the world. But in the East, we see the exact opposite, where whole nations can be considered what we call here in the West racist, or what would be deemed racist. The Chinese are definitely, they frown upon mixing with other cultures and other races. You go to the Arabic countries, almost every single one of them, the same thing. They frown upon mixing with people from the West or European descent. And that's pretty much, you'll find that carte blanche in all those countries. But when you come here, it's more of a free-for-all. Why do you feel that there's these two distinct teachings on race, where in the East and in those countries, in Asiatic countries, hey, we stay with our own kind, but here we're just having a free-for-all love fest with the different tribes?
Well, Mo, I don't want to get too political here, but my own thought on that is that we have been conditioned to break down that in-group loyalty. The phenomenon has been encouraged by the powers that be, and again, I think that could be largely a control factor. It seems really that everyone is allowed to express pride in their ancestors and their people, except people of European heritage. I feel that we are constantly told that our ancestors were, quote, dead white males and so forth and so forth. Or as Susan Sontag said, we are the cancer of history, things of that sort. I think there's a lot of politics that goes on this. And I believe that awareness of one's ancestry, one's antecedents, or even one's race, if you choose to use that a very emotion-laden word. I think that's a good thing. I think it's good for people of African heritage. I think it's good for people of Asian heritage. And I think it's good for people of European heritage as well.
In saying that, there also seems to be a new acceptance for this type of teachings that we're finding. Yeah, there was a recent announcement in the UK that pagan beliefs should be taught alongside Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, and will be included in the Cornish curriculum. What's your thoughts on that? Is it starting to become more open to these types of teachings?
Yes, it seems to be, and I'm really thrilled by that. I too saw that article, and I greeted it joyfully for a couple of reasons, a couple of different levels. For one thing, of course, it's religious freedom and a recognition that other religions exist. So just from that sort of human rights approach and respect for different beliefs and so forth, I think that's a good thing. But something else is really good there, and to me, it's the idea that people are seeking those ancient roots. They're seeking to get back to what their ancestors did. I think that many people around the world are becoming dissatisfied with sort of the globalized produce, consume, and obey philosophy that seems to pretty much have a strong grip on the planet. People are looking for a different history. They're looking for different memories, different ways of being. And in doing so, they often turn back to their ancestral roots. That is where they find sustenance. That is where they find encouragement. We see this among the European peoples, obviously. Then you mentioned the Cornish example, but I think that there are many Europeans who are in spiritual revolt against the homogenization of the European Union. But also, this is all around the world. You have the whole fourth world, as it is called, that is made up of indigenous peoples. And they too, they want to hang on to who they are. And they sometimes, fight political or even guerrilla wars, to maintain that. I've worked with Tibetans who are trying to get the freedom of their country back. I've lived with armed guerrillas in the jungles of Burma/Myanmar, helping people who are trying to assert their existence as a people and so forth. So I'm very sympathetic to that.
Basically, it's not about, being tribal or being racist. It's just honoring, of course, your ancestors and the way of your ancestors, but at the same time, respecting the other tribes, the other religions, the other races for their own beliefs and so forth, where we can coexist with one another and all find our own truths and our own teachings, but at the same time, do not disrespect, do not make any racist connotations toward any other belief or any other race or tribe, correct?
I absolutely agree with that. I would take it farther. I would say not only do we not disrespect these people, not only do we not behave towards them in derogatory or racist ways, but they are our allies. They too are fighting to maintain their way. We as Europeans are again seeking to return to and to find and to honor and to practice our ancestral roots. We don't have to be the same. The important thing is that we support each other in being different. I try to carry that out in my life in every respect. I don't know if you're familiar with the anti-poaching work that I'm engaged in Africa.
No,
but
no.
I have another nonprofit beside the Asatru Folk Assembly, in which I oppose elephant poaching, and I'm very much willing to take my soldiering skills from the past and to take those into the field, fighting alongside Africans to maintain the existence of the incredible species we call elephants. And that, to me, that's only fair. It doesn't mean I honor my people any less. Oh, quite the contrary.
Your actions speak more than your words, so it's great that you're doing that and you're showing that by the way you live, Stephen, because I know people out there, they might construe, your organization or other organizations out there, and it always seems to be, more of the Nordic type organizations that get cornered or pigeonholed as being racist, but there's, of course, all types of different organizations out there that are loyal to their ancestors or their groups. You have the Jews and the different other races, but when it comes to the Nordics, they start getting cornered or pigeonholed in there with, Nazis or skinheads, but that's not the case, correct?
I absolutely agree with you. I absolutely agree. In the Declaration of Purpose, which is the guiding document for my organization, the Asatru Folk Assembly, our first primary purpose is obviously practice the religion, to honor the holy powers, and so forth. The second one is to support the existence of our people and the continuation of our people, but always with the understanding, as we have in a separate point, that we want a planet with real diversity, not buzzword diversity, but real diversity, where people can be free to practice the ways of their ancestors, to govern the way they want to live, and to live respectfully and honorably alongside each other around the world.
Yeah, and with your organization and you being here in the United States, how long have you guys been an organization? When did you start it?
Well, that's a long story, Mo. I'll
Okay.
keep it simple for you. In 1972, the predecessor to my current organizations was formed. It was called the Viking Brotherhood, a rather sensationalist name, but you got to remember I was young and full of testosterone and in my 20s at that point in time.
Of course. That's a cool name, though.
It is kind of cool. Actually, we've got a fraternal organization that has adopted that name. Not we, it's not a part of the AFA, but they're friends of ours, has adopted that name just to continue the lineage, and that's kind of cool, just to keep it alive. But and that was in August of 1972 that we received our little letter from the Internal Revenue Service saying, yes, you're a tax exempt religious organization. So I think that was probably a first of some sort. And then in 1976, the Viking Brotherhood became the Asatru Free Assembly, and it carried that name for a few years. Then I took a sabbatical for about 5-6 years, and I wandered the world, and I wrote for military magazines, and I reported from third world hellholes, places you can't drink the water. And then in 1994, 1995, I reestablished what we currently have, which is the Asatru Folk Assembly. So it's been a long 45 years. What can I say?
When you look at what we're allowed to do here in the States and, of course, many other Western countries, we're essentially allowed to honor the ways of our ancestors as long as we honor the laws of the land. And you personally have not been persecuted or been gone after by any kind of conspiracies or anything like that, do you feel, over the last 45 years because of your beliefs?
Well, there have been a few things that were bothersome. Back just before the year 2000, there were some law enforcement people that frankly wrote up a bunch of trash about us, but it was all nonsense, and there've been other people who tried to pin the racist label on us or subversive label or whatever. But, upon closer investigation, all their claims, evaporate into thin air. So, We've had minor problems, but basically it's been an easy ride. In the last 20 years or 15 years, I'll say, there's been absolutely no problems. We are made up of people who are, good citizens. We have many people of a military background or a law enforcement background. I've been both a soldier and a corrections officer, so I've worked both ends of that. And in all those years, I've received, several different security clearances, never had a problem. That tells me something importantly. And I was also a public school teacher for years, where you live a transparent life, and there was never any sort of an issue with my behavior, my beliefs, or my affiliations. So decades ago, yeah, there was problems from time to time. And a lot of the watchdog organizations kind of feed that frenzy a little bit sometimes. They've got to get their money from somewhere.
Yeah, and I'm sure these security clearances also deal with FBI files that I feel many of us in the alternative research and truth movements, and of course with movements such as yours, you're going to have some files done on you and research, and if you come out clean and you're respecting your ancestors, but you're also not persecuting other races or other beliefs and so forth, that they allow us, the powers that be, the rulers of law, to go ahead and do this as long as we respect others.
Well, it's a little hard to nail me as a racist when I'm willing to fight and bleed alongside African men to save their their environmental heritage.
I agree, Stephen.
And I similarly worked with, as I mentioned, Tibetans, the Karen people of Eastern Burma, and so forth. I've walked that walk, not just talked that talk.
In researching you before you came on the show and over the last several months, Stephen, I agree wholeheartedly with that statement. I am not a big supporter or a believer in racist organizations that condemn other races or believe they're superior to others, which I do not get one inclination or 1% of that from you or your organization. It's actually the opposite. It's just honoring your ancestors, and that's what you guys are about. Do you make sure that you screen people a little bit before they come into the organization to make sure that that's not their intentions and that they're not doing that out there on the streets that could possibly damage your reputation?
Well, we do to some extent a little background investigation. It's nothing really in depth because that requires some considerable resources. But we look at people's Facebook pages. Is this really the kind of person we want in our organization? Does this person understand that this is not a racist organization? And yet, on the other hand, do they understand that we are ancestrally based? There's a spectrum in there, and we need people who get that, who get it about ancestors, who get it about heritage, but who are not out to do anything disrespectful in regards to other groups. We screen for sexual predators, things like that. We look people over, and we always tell them, read our Declaration of Purpose. The Declaration of Purpose is what drives the Asatru Folk Assembly. That's our guiding document. And it's very balanced and very fair, and people can find that online and take a look at it.
And it's amazing the kind of background searches we could do today without the help of, law enforcement or some expensive background check. Just checking people on Google through their Facebook pages and through the statements they make tells a lot about that person.
Well, yes, and there's a whole field called open source intelligence, that even the system uses, the stuff that's, on the deep web and things like that. I'm sorry, I'm just going to say, and in terms of being looked at, the word I'm hearing is that anyone who has ever used Tor or even gone to the to a site describing how to use Tor is on the watch list, So basically, they're everywhere.
What is that? Would I explain what that means? Tor?
Oh, Tor. I don't remember what it stands for. It's an router kind of thing. It's a way of surfing the web anonymously.
Okay, gotcha.
Securely. And, I can think of a lot of reasons people might want that are very valid and legitimate reasons. But, if you're interested in that sort of thing, somebody's going to they'll be saving all your stuff in case you become infamous.
Well, and a lot of people don't realize is the United States military were the people that designed the internet, and I assume that they still own the internet, and that's part of managing us, even though we're allowed to connect to everybody. I don't think they call it the web for no reason. You don't surf a web, you kind of get caught in it sometimes. So
I think that's a good observation. I really do.
And let's talk a little bit about paganism. A lot of people out there that might be Christian or Islamic or any of these Judaic, Abrahamic religions, they don't understand before these religions had started that primarily everybody was pagan. And that just simply means country dweller. And forgive me if I'm wrong or correct me, please. Can you explain the difference, not between religion and paganism, but between Asatru and modern paganism?
Yes. As you pointed out, the word pagan comes from Latin, meaning country dweller, or actually sort of a rustic. There's a similar term in Asatru that some people use. They describe themselves as heathens. And of course, we think of that as kind of a derogatory term, which is why I personally don't use it. But it actually derives from the word heath, out amongst the heather. And again, with the same implication as pagan in that regard. But paganism, as it's commonly understood in the industrialized West today, is not exactly what we're, I will have to say that's sort of a cultural thing. Many of the people who call themselves pagans today are neo-pagans Yeah, they're free to believe what they want to believe. I get that. It doesn't make them bad people. But the point is they don't understand that many of these religious systems, the beliefs of the Greeks or of the Romans or of the Norse or of the Sumerians or whoever, many of these were native religions. They're the religions of a people. No more go back and practice some of those than I could practice American Indian religion, which I honor and respect, but I'm not American Indian. I can't go to the inner workings of a Sioux powwow. I can see the same superficial stuff that everybody else can see. And then when it's time for all the visitors to go home, they do the things that are important and sacred to them. I honor that. I respect that. And it's all about that ancestral connection. I can't wake up in the morning, look myself in the mirror as I'm getting ready to shave and say, I think I'm take up Amazonian tribal religions, because I'm not an Amazonian native. I'm not. I look in the mirror. I'm a man of European heritage. That is my people are from. That is the way that is right for me. I respect the other and I support strenuously and will support strenuously of other peoples, and their right is that, but it's not me.
Yeah, and the modern paganism, what you call neo-paganism, basically you're saying that they worship everything and all the different pagan beliefs, and it doesn't matter what it is. So where they're losing connection is with their own tribes, as opposed to just focusing, say, on the Nordic tradition of their ancestry. There's basically, it's all one big enchilada cluster, and they're worshiping everything, and they don't understand it.
Well, they have the impression that a religion is something you can pick off a shelf, like a hat or a pair of shoes. It's something you put on. But no, a true religion, the religion of your soul, the religion of your ancestors, isn't something you put on. It's what you are.
And that would go back to the statement you've been saying for several years, and you'd said you'd seen me write this on my blog, is our ancestors are us and we are them.
Yes, pretty much. Pretty much exactly that.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I feel being a Gnostic is that spiritual knowledge. And what Plato had said is all learning is remembering. And I believe that's one of the keys to us to evolving is connecting with our ancestors, whether they be Nordic, whether they be Greek or Roman or whatever they might be, is that we, as people all around the world, whatever race, whatever faith, that we connect with them and we honor them because that's what they would like us to do. Are they out there? Are they in the netherworld wanting us to do this and connect with them? Are they lost out there, our ancestors, some of them?
Well, I'm generalizing from the Indo-European ideas on that. Indo-European being a fairly broad term that would certainly include the Germanics and the Nordics, but would also include the Greeks and the Romans, and various and sundry other peoples, who in many ways were related. I mean, the philologists will try to describe that just in terms of language, but I think if we look closely, we will see that they were also connected in older, deeper, and genetically linked ways. I mean, we had, for example, the blonde mummies out on the edge of Mongolia, in the Tarim Basin, that area out there. The Indo-Europeans were all over the place, and I believe that we're all linked. And the general Indo-European view, which you find from culture after culture, be it, Celtic or Roman or Greek or Germanic, is that the ancestors want to be remembered. That's what they need. They need us to tell their stories. They need us to continue the family line. They need us to bring honor to that family line and to not disgrace it and to not besmirch it in any way. They need us to be true to them. That's why throughout our cultures, we would make offerings on the graves of our ancestors. We would, pour them libations. We would do funerary rites for them. I mean, even animals feel that urge. Elephants will come back and caress the bones of their relatives, years after their death, things of that sort. That's a deep urge. And I know that that's pretty much the deal with the ancestors. They need to be remembered and honored. They give us gifts in return. You see, I don't think that death is like a brick wall. It's more like a flimsy curtain. And sometimes that curtain parts. And through it, we can hear the whispers, metaphorically speaking, of the ancestors. The ancestors send us love, their concern, their interest in our well-being. They send us inspiration. They send us luck. That time that your parachute opens when it absolutely should not have. Things like that. We, in turn, keep our end of the deal by honoring them and remembering them, telling their stories, telling our grandchildren their stories.
That's a beautiful way to put it. I got chills all over me and almost tears to my eyes when you describe it in such a way, because I, again, agree with you wholeheartedly that that is the way that we should do it. And I'd say my life changed for the better, I believe, once I started doing that. And one of my beliefs is over the last several years when I started following the ways of my ancestors, where I would get these communications that would come to me either in meditations or dreams, or sometimes just when I'm doing something where it would be either a word or something that, or a vision of a symbol that would always relate to my ancestors and my tribe. And then when I would, of course, use the magnificent internet created by the U.S. military, I'd use Google, I would be able to connect with them, where I would be, say, here, in Southern California, and that morning I'm all of a sudden I'm in, Crete, I'm in Greece, or I'm in, Egypt, studying the exact same symbol and finding it in the exact location where my ancestors were, and I never even knew that they were there. Do you believe that they send us these messages, these symbols, and these signs to help us?
I do. And I think that often happens with our recent ancestors, newly deceased, and it happens with those from much farther back, I believe. Some scientists did a study once, just a couple of years back. I don't remember the institute or anything of that sort. But they interviewed people who had recently experienced the loss of a relative or someone very close to them. And in the majority of cases, greater than 50% of those cases, people reported that after that person died, they felt some sense of contact, some sense of their presence, and so forth. Of course, the scientist's concern was, why do people have this hallucination? Well, that, I'm afraid, is the shortcoming of the scientific method. But yes, I believe that happened. We've all had stuff like that happen on one level or another. I was very ill once, and I was in the hospital recovering from cancer surgery, and my mother walked into the room. I don't think she would mind me saying this even in front of your vast audience, because I think she would understand. Maybe that's why she did it, was it so I could tell others that the bond with the ancestors continues after death. Death does not limit the ancestral bond. Blood is not only thicker than water, it is more powerful than death.
I agree wholeheartedly, and that's where I believe our consciousness comes from, and why a lot in the old pagan religions you would see, sacrifices and blood rituals. I don't believe it was a sinister thing, but they had realized that's where the seat of the soul and our consciousness and the answers to all our lost history was contained. Do you believe that a lot of the stone monuments, all these immortal stones, carvings, hieroglyphs, text, and everything was left for us, the sons and daughters of our ancestors, so we could, of course, remember them and find clues to who they were? They knew that possibly this would happen.
I think that is in accordance with that sort of universal, I guess it's a universal law. That's a pretty sweeping phrase, but I will say with the idea that our duty is to remember those who've gone before us. And the traditional idea in the Indo-European and European peoples is that the loyalty and the memory that we show to the ancestors in some way affects their condition in the afterworld, the afterlife. You probably saw the movie Troy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, magnificent movie. it really says that very plainly. The whole movie is about immortality through fame, through great deeds. And Achilles, of course, being the person who was, striving for that form of immortality. But you find the same idea exactly amongst the Anglo-Saxons. You find the same idea amongst the Norse. You find this everywhere in the Indo-European world, the idea that one way of attaining immortality is to accomplish great things and to be remembered for it. There was that incredible scene where the young boy early in the movie had gone to get Achilles and bring him back from his carousing and his drinking and so forth. And he gets him on his horse, and the young boy says to Achilles, he says, "Oh, you should see this guy they want you to fight. There's no way I'd fight him." And that's why Achilles turned around, looked him in the eyes, and said, "That is why no one will remember your name." Bam. That one line was the whole idea behind this movie. Accomplish great things. That is evolution in many ways, or it's a sign of evolution. If you can accomplish deeds, do something that will be remembered for its heroism, for its impact, for its absolute rightness down through the generations. That's why we have rune stones over graves and people wanting to be remembered, things of that sort. Yeah.
Can you explain the runes and what they have to do with your organization, Stephen?
Runes are the sacred Germanic script. It is a set of symbols which can be used for writing because they have a phonetic value, and often were in the old days used for writing, but mostly, especially in the early period, the writing was pretty much for sacred purposes. It wasn't like laundry lists. Now you did have the equivalent of grocery lists basically much later in the period, as the old culture was becoming more degenerate. In Dublin, when they were excavating the waterfront there, they found scads of inscriptions in runes, and it was often very mundane stuff. But the real importance of runes doesn't lie in the ability to write love letters. It lies in the ability to communicate with the holy powers, with the gods, with the goddesses. They are sacred symbols. Each of them has not just a phonetic value, but also a meaning, a hidden secret meaning, a concept that lies behind the appearance. And in fact, the word rune in just about all the Germanic languages means something like mystery, sacred mystery, and so forth. So runes can be used in a wide variety of ways today. They can be used in divination, much like the I Ching, which also is a symbol set and sort of a microcosm of the greater universe. The same with the runes. The whole set of runes taken together basically represent or constitute or incorporate, if you will, the different aspects that make up the universe. I have experimented with these, and they are highly effective. I once made a series of drawing forth of runes out of a bag on several consecutive days, and every time I would draw out the same piece of wood that had that particular rune on it. And I calculated the odds later, and the odds were about 1 in 7.5 million of getting a particular sequence that I did. Wow. So I feel they certainly work. And again, that the mystery of their working deals, I think, with aspects of the universe that we simply don't understand, but which sometimes we glimpse vaguely in some parts of quantum physics, the interconnectedness of things.
Do you offer any teachings on runes, or do you recommend any books or anything out there that people could learn more about them?
The books I would recommend are those by Edred Thorson. His first book on the subject was called Futhark. Futhark is a sort of, it's a term like ABCs, only in runes. The first 6 runes in the rune sequence spell Futhark, so hence the name of the book. He also wrote Rune Lore, which is a very valuable book, and several others over time. To include, he's also got one specifically on divination, and it's had a couple of different titles and different editions. But a quick search would reveal those. Edred actually has his PhD in Germanic languages and literature. He's very erudite, very knowledgeable on this subject. I don't think you could beat him as a reference.
Great, thanks for sharing that. And I know that your organization is very active in having meetings and so forth. Do you have any future events coming up that you'd like to share with the audience and the people around the world?
Well, yes, we've been holding a lot of rather major meetings lately. In fact, for a while our big annual event was always in California because that's where I live, and then we started having significant gatherings over in the Northeast, up around Pennsylvania, and then we started having some down in Florida as of last spring. We started that. And now we've got a recurring set of events that happen up in the Northwest. So we've managed to sort of nail down the four corners of the United States in that regard. Our next upcoming one is one that we celebrate in October, and it's in the Northeast. Anyone who's interested in that or interested in the AFA for that matter should take a look online. They can find that information. And it's basically for AFA members and people who are clearly sympathetic, people we call friends of the AFA. So if any of your listeners would like to check that out, look over the AFA and see how you feel about us. And if you're interested, we would obviously welcome your membership and or continued correspondence with you to see if you want to become a member.
For those people out there that like what you have to say, Stephen, can you give them just a little bit more information about joining your organization and what they need to do to apply for membership?
Well, it's pretty simple, really. Yes, if they go onto our website at www.runestone.org, they will find a section there on membership, a little drop-down menu that will help them out on that. And of course, they should read about us and be sure they understand what we're about. I think that actually this interview was giving them a very good idea of what we're about, and I appreciate that very much. But again, read our Declaration of Purpose. It is our defining document, and it's been something we've stuck with for years and years.
What's next for Stephen McNallen? What do you have planned for yourself and your organization?
Oh my goodness! Well, lots of stuff. Duh. Continued gatherings. Of course, we've got this get together in October that's going to be magnificent because we got some awesome people up in the Northeast. We're taking a new approach to our local and regional organizations in terms of tying people together in different ways that are supportive and that will further both their evolution and the permanence and the beneficial effects of the AFA. I'm, of course, heavily involved in all of that, but I'm also involved in the Elephant Project. I have a nonprofit called Forever Elephants, and currently we are attempting to tie down a proposal to go into Congo and train park rangers to fight poachers. I've got infantry skills, and I know lots of people who have infantry skills. And our goal is to train the poachers, to give them a little bit of a leg up, because in general they're outclassed in terms of physical equipment and things of that sort. But also they don't necessarily have the kind of small unit training that's necessary to deal with what is not just a criminal activity, but virtually a military activity. Poaching is a very sophisticated thing now, driven by a billion-dollar industry. And with high tech and with a cartel type network that extends from the bush in Africa all the way to places like China. So it's a huge endeavor, and I would like to fight that as much as I can.
You're the Achilles of fighting these elephant poachers, huh?
Well, it's the right thing to do. I believe that also true serves life. I've never been an environmentalist in a sort of stereotypical way, and people get the wrong idea about environmentalists, really. I mean, it's like everything else, it gets cliched. Your cliche is the intellectual who drinks herb tea and wears Birkenstocks. I don't, that's not me. I think my favorite environmentalist was a guy named Edward Abbey. was sort of a beer-drinking, gun-owning, hunting kind of environmentalist. But yeah, it's one of my causes. Asatru has to serve life. It serves the physical life of our own peoples, our own tribes, but also supports the life with a capital L of all other groups around the planet and the environment on which we depend.
As a leader, Stephen, I feel that you're leading by example. Your works clearly show your motives, which is essentially to serve humanity, to serve your tribe, to serve your people, then also to honor your ancestors by leaving this world a better place in the name of your ancestors. And I thank you for your time today. It was a great pleasure speaking with you, and I wish you the best of luck in everything you do.
Well, thank you very much, Mo. I've really enjoyed this.
All right, take care, bud.
Okay.
All right, bye.